Hi there guys, my name's Cody, I have schizophrenia, and today we're going to be interviewing Lauren from the YouTube page Living Well with Schizophrenia. I had two different interviews I did with Lauren, but this video is going to be about it's going to be about anosig anosig and no an
ANOSOGNOSIA.
anosognosia, which is a symptom of severe mental illness that can impair a person's ability to perceive their own illness. This is something that is fairly common with people that have schizophrenia or psychosis. I've never touched on this topic a lot on my page, so I decided to bring Lauren on to talk more about it. So before we get into the interview, I just want to remind you guys this video is sponsored by Dope. A small percent of every purchase will go towards funding mental health and addiction resources. And before we go any further, let me introduce Lauren. So joining us today, we have Lauren, or better known on YouTube as Living Well with Schizophrenia. Lauren, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today to talk about anosognosia. Did I say that right?
You got it. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm so proud of myself for being able to pronounce that. It's like when I say the word recidivism, I always get so proud.
Recidivism. That is hard.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
Anosognosia. Yeah, it's hard. But you got it.
Well, I wanted to thank you for coming on and talking about this because this is something I've researched in the past. It's something I get a lot of questions about as a schizophrenia advocate. And so can you just start by telling my followers a little bit about you, a little bit about your advocacy, because you do such great work on YouTube and whoever isn't following you should be following you. So if you can just tell them a little bit about who you are so we can get into this topic today.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Lauren, and together with my partner, Rob, we started the YouTube channel Living Well with Schizophrenia just to kind of increase awareness and understanding and compassion for those who are living with schizophrenia spectrum illnesses. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder in 2016. And yeah, I just kind of share about my journey living with the illness.
And I have talked about it on my page quite a few times, but just for anyone who may not know, can you describe what schizoaffective disorder is?
Yeah, sure. So schizoaffective disorder is a combination of schizophrenia and a major mood disorder. So for me, that's bipolar disorder, but yeah, that's what schizoaffective disorder is. It's on the schizophrenia spectrum.
And I just want to say, as someone who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, I have seen my mom struggle with schizoaffective disorder, and I know living with a mood disorder is hard enough, but on top of that, living with mental illness like schizophrenia, that has to be so difficult. And I really appreciate you bringing light to schizoaffective disorder because it's something that I had to watch growing up with my mother, but it's nothing I could really talk about because I haven't personally struggled that much with any mood disorders. So I really appreciate your advocacy around schizoaffective disorder as well.
Oh, thank you.
But today we're going to talk about anosognosia, and I'm really excited. If you want to start by just explaining what it is for anyone who might not know, and a little bit about why it's something you talk about in your advocacy work.
Sure. Yeah. So anosognosia is kind of when someone lacks insight into their illness. And what I mean by this is that they don't really understand that they have an illness. So someone who's living with schizophrenia doesn't understand or doesn't maybe accept that they are living with schizophrenia, and they don't have that insight into the fact that they are dealing with that illness. And I think it's really important to talk about in terms of advocacy for schizophrenia and mental illness in general, because I think it's something that a lot of people come up against, both when they're doing poorly, and struggling with symptoms and not understanding what they're struggling with, but also on the other end of things, when they're doing really well. This has happened for me a lot where I'm doing well, I'm stable, and then I fall into a period of anosognosia where I don't believe I have the illness. And so I go off meds or whatnot. And so there's various stages in the illness where anosognosia can come up and cause problems.
Yeah, and that's something that I've always wanted to learn more about and talk about because obviously we see a lot of people living with schizophrenia go off of their meds because they start doing better on meds and they think, I never had an issue to begin with. Obviously, I'm doing just fine. And that's something we see all of the time. It's something I've went through, as you just stated, something you went through. But also, we see it a lot in people who haven't been diagnosed yet. I know in my first 2 years of symptoms, not only did I refuse to admit I had an issue, I didn't think I had an issue. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me, despite being raised by a mother who is on the schizophrenia spectrum and being very knowledgeable about what that entails. I still didn't believe that that's what was going on with me. At one point, I had a delusion that when my symptoms first began, I thought I was gaining some sort of ability to hear the voices of people around me, um, or hear the thoughts of people around me. And so I've heard a lot about people who have anosognosia before they're ever diagnosed. And I don't know if that's more common or if it's something that we see more after they started getting treatment. Did you experience anosognosia before you were diagnosed at all? Or for you, was it more throughout your treatment?
For me, it was more throughout my treatment, but that makes sense that people would experience it a lot pre-diagnosis as well, because there's less knowledge about what's going on. And so that feeds into that lack of insight. And I think that that's actually an important thing to discuss, is that a way that I've kind of tried to combat my experience with anosognosia is through education and through increasing the knowledge I have about the illness that I'm living with.
How beneficial is it for you then? Because I was raised by a mother with schizophrenia. She knew that there was a chance I could develop the illness, and she really highly suggested that I educate myself about it. And I think, like you, my education is what allowed me to go get treatment. And granted, it took a while, but it's the reason I was able to go get treatment and able to finally accept, that I had an issue to deal with. How important do you think it is that people educate themselves on stuff like this, whether or not they have like a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia?
I think it's so important, for a multitude of reasons. First off, being just awareness and general compassion for people who are experiencing things like this as a means of early intervention. The more we know about it, the earlier we can intervene for people who are experiencing these kinds of symptoms and illnesses. And then also just as a protective factor for if you are living with it, being able to understand as fully as possible, what you're experiencing and what you're up against basically allows you to have more tools at your disposal to be able to figure out how to manage it and how to live with it.
So here's another question too, and it's probably not anything you could just say definitely yes or no. Do you think there are people who aren't diagnosed who may be suffering from anosognosia that haven't gotten any treatment yet, that are, because I know we say we understand the percentage of people with schizophrenia is about 1% of the population. Do you think it could potentially be higher than that because of anosognosia?
I mean, it could perhaps. I wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the barrier to accessing support or care and receiving a diagnosis. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
And then the last question I have, do you have any tips for people who are living with schizophrenia, who do take medication, but may be starting to struggle or starting to have like these thoughts of, I'm not mentally ill. This is just something I'm living with? Because much like a delusional state, it's not something you can just know and be like, oh, it's fine. Is there any tips or tricks you do to help combat that when you start sensing that you may be struggling with anosognosia?
Yeah. So something that actually helped me is my last hospitalization. That's what happened. I went off my meds because I felt I didn't need them anymore. And so once I was relatively stable or, discharged from hospital, I recorded a video explaining what happened and saying, hey, just remember, this is what happens when you do that, when you think that way. And I haven't actually gone back to watch it, but just knowing that I did that and being able to think back to, what I was thinking in that moment helps me understand like, oh, okay, I might not fully understand right now that, that I am ill or that I have a mental illness that needs medicating, but I can understand that I was telling myself before that like, hey, when this happens, you end up in hospital. And
Yep.
that's not ever something that I want. And so that's generally enough encouragement for me to be like, okay, I should take my medication. Like, I understand there's a bigger picture here, sort of thing.
Wow, that's a really great tip. Well, I appreciate you coming on here and educating everyone a little more about anosognosia. Like I said, if you guys aren't following Lauren, go give her a follow because when it comes to educating people about schizophrenia and talking about some of the really difficult things that people with schizophrenia live with, Lauren is a great resource and an amazing advocate. Lauren, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to talk to you today about anosognosia, which I have pronounced now at least 10 times correctly. So
You've got it. Thank you so much for having me.